He had just stepped out of a grocery store with a bag of apples. Minutes later, he was face down on the pavement like a criminal. Two officers saw a black man in casual clothes and assumed the worst, wrecking his car and dignity without a single question. But what they didn't know was that he was Major General Arthur J. Miller, a decorated Army veteran with powerful resolve and a platform they couldn't silence. Just wait until you see how this story turned upside down, and why justice, in the end, stood taller than rank. It was the kind of morning that made the world feel slower. A gray drizzle clung to the air in Huntsville, Alabama, the kind of southern rain that glossed over sidewalks and turned every light into a reflection. The parking lot of Mason's Grocery and More sat quiet under the wet hush, except for the soft hum of automatic doors and the occasional splash of tires through puddles. A black Cadillac Escalade, gleaming with raindrops, sat parked in a corner spot near the front. Inside the store, a tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair checked out at the register. He carried nothing but a brown paper bag filled with apples. His movements were deliberate, calm. He thanked the cashier, tipped his cap, a navy blue baseball cap pulled low over his brow, and stepped back out into the drizzle. Arthur J. Miller, 53, didn't look like what the world imagined a two-star general to be. Today he wore a dark hoodie, worn jeans, and cross-trainers. No medals, no ribbons, no uniform. Just another man grabbing groceries for his wife, who had asked him earlier that morning for something fresh and sweet to help her with her blood sugar. He approached the Escalade and opened the driver's side door with a soft beep. That's when the screech cut through the rain. A Dodge Charger fishtailed into the lot from the far end of the street, sirens off, lights dark. Its sudden appearance was jarring, loud, reckless, out of place in the quiet morning. The vehicle slammed to a stop behind the Escalade. Before Arthur could react, both front doors of the Charger burst open. Two officers emerged. The first was a middle-aged white man in a duty jacket with lieutenant stripes, later identified as Lieutenant Troy S. Hanley. The second, younger and leaner, followed close behind. That was Officer Jason T. Mayers. Neither of them hesitated. No greeting, no explanation. Only drawn weapons and barking orders. "Hands up! Get on the ground now!" Arthur froze, still holding the paper bag. He raised one hand halfway in confusion. "Officers, I think there's been a mistake," he began, but he never got the sentence out. "Hands on the hood now!" Hanley shouted again, stepping forward with force in his voice. "On your knees!" There was a moment, just a split second, when Arthur hesitated, not out of defiance, but out of sheer disbelief. He had served tours across Iraq, Somalia, and Eastern Europe. He had trained troops in strategic engagement, in de-escalation, but nothing prepared him for this. And then came a shove. Arthur was pushed forward, the paper bag flying from his hands and bursting open on the ground. Red apples scattered into the street. He instinctively reached out to brace his fall, but his arm twisted awkwardly, and his shoulder slammed into the pavement. His car keys fell from his pocket and landed in a rain puddle. Officer Mayers quickly pressed his knee into Arthur's back to restrain him. The air was tight. A few bystanders stood frozen on the sidewalk. One woman clutched her purse. A man with an umbrella slowly pulled out his phone, angling it low and discreet. Lieutenant Hanley, meanwhile, marched toward the Escalade, scanning the interior through the window. Without a warrant, without probable cause, he opened the driver's door and reached into the front seat. There, he found a military-issued tablet and a canvas duffel bag. Inside the bag was a full-dress uniform, polished medals, nameplate, and most noticeably, the official ID of a U.S. Army general. Hanley scoffed. "Fake," he muttered, loud enough for Mayers to hear. "Guy's trying to pass himself off as military, probably part of some scam." He tossed the bag onto the wet pavement without a second glance. The badge inside clinked against the concrete. Arthur winced, still pinned to the ground. He didn't fight back. He just kept his eyes open. Then Hanley did something that drew gasps from the people watching. He struck the car's center touchscreen with the butt of his flashlight, cracking the glass. When the device blinked out, he started prying through the dashboard, pulling wires and shoving compartments, clearly convinced he'd uncover something illegal. There was nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no stolen merchandise. Just groceries, a tablet, and a military jacket. The damage was done within 15 minutes. The Escalade, now shorted and cracked, wouldn't even start. The air smelled of fried electronics. And then, silence. From the edge of the crowd, a calm, composed voice broke the tension. A man in a tan trench coat and wide-brimmed hat stepped forward, flipping open a lanyard. The Fox News logo swung gently in the breeze as he tucked his phone into his pocket. "Officers," the reporter said, his voice steady. "Do you have any idea who that man is?" Hanley turned. "That's Major General Arthur J. Miller, veteran of the U.S. Army, recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal, advisor to the Joint Chiefs." In the stillness that followed, Lieutenant Hanley paled, just slightly. His posture stiffened. The grip on his flashlight loosened. No one said a word, but the rain hadn't stopped falling, and someone, somewhere, had caught everything on camera. 2 hours later, inside the Huntsville Police Department, the atmosphere was tense and unusually quiet. A closed-door emergency meeting had been called in Conference Room C. Officers spoke in hushed voices. Several senior staff hovered over computer screens, combing through body cam footage and drafting internal memos. 2 different versions of the incident report had already been typed. A third was being revised now. Softer wording, fewer details, a different narrative. But it was too late. The footage, captured by a bystander's phone, had already spread like wildfire online. First it hit Twitter, then TikTok, then Reddit. Overnight, it crossed 4 million views. The hashtags were trending nationally. General Miller, Escalade Justice, No Uniform, No Rights. The public didn't just see what happened. They heard the silence. They saw a decorated military officer, unarmed, restrained on the ground. They saw a vehicle, his vehicle, being dismantled without warrant, without probable cause. And they saw the face of the man who never once raised his voice. Now, that same man sat across from Chief Melinda Hartwell, a stern but pragmatic leader in her late 50s. Her office was bare, except for 2 plaques and a framed photo of her graduating class from the police academy. Arthur J. Miller sat in the guest chair, straight-backed, hands folded, his eyes calm and unwavering. She had read his record. She knew exactly who he was now. But he spoke first. "I'm not suing," he said simply. Chief Hartwell blinked, taken aback. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm not here for compensation. I won't settle out of court, and I won't disappear quietly. But I will demand accountability." His voice was measured, not angry, not accusatory, but there was steel beneath every word. "I do this," he continued, "not for myself. I have the rank, the recognition, and the resources. But there are millions who don't wear stars on their shoulders. Millions who won't be believed unless someone like me refuses to let this slide." There was a silence between them, thick with weight. She didn't argue. She simply nodded. The next morning, the story broke wide open. A press conference was held outside Huntsville's City Hall. Dozens of reporters gathered, their microphones huddled like sunflowers to the podium. Behind them, cameras broadcasted live to CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News. The nation was watching. Arthur didn't speak from a script. He didn't call names, nor point fingers. He gave facts. He spoke slowly, with clarity, listing the names of black men across the country who had experienced excessive force, many without cameras, many without recourse. He held up the cracked military ID, retrieved from the puddle-stained pavement near his wrecked vehicle. "This isn't about rank," he said. "It's not about medals or titles. It's not about who I am." He looked directly into the crowd of flashing lights and digital eyes. "It's about what I look like. You believe in badges. You believe in uniforms. But if the color of a man's skin erases the respect for both, then what are we really protecting?" And then came the closing sentence, a line that would echo across the internet and become a defining quote in the national conversation. "If there hadn't been a phone camera, I would have just been labeled a suspect who resisted." The clip went viral within hours. Talk shows dissected it. Veterans groups rallied behind it. And within a week, Arthur J. Miller was invited to Washington, D.C. Inside the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense greeted him personally, not just to offer support, but to listen. Arthur declined all monetary compensation. He refused a settlement check offered quietly through back channels. Instead, he presented a proposal, the Justice for Veterans Initiative. It was a federal pilot program designed to provide legal defense and advocacy for active duty service members and veterans who experience misconduct at the hands of law enforcement. Within 2 months, it had bipartisan support. Within 4, it had a congressional sponsor. Arthur didn't return to private life. He stepped into public duty, not by campaign or by appointment, but by calling. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but he was the one the room listened to. 6 months later, the sun rose over Huntsville with a gentleness that hadn't been felt in a long time. The rain was gone, replaced by a clean southern breeze that rustled the trees along Mason Avenue. Birds chirped lazily from utility lines, and the sidewalks, still cracked, still familiar, carried the slow rhythm of a community easing into its morning. And then, a familiar vehicle turned the corner. It was a Cadillac Escalade, polished to a mirror sheen, its deep black surface reflecting the sky above like glass. But this wasn't just a repair. It was a restoration. The SUV had been fully rebuilt, not by insurance, not by city funds, but by a coalition of military veterans across the state. Many of them had never met Arthur Miller in person. They simply knew who he was and what he stood for. He pulled into the same parking space near Mason's grocery, the exact one where it had all begun. When he stepped out, heads turned, not out of curiosity, out of recognition. A woman placing oranges into her trunk paused, smiled, and gave a slow nod. A man in work boots and a neon vest walked past and said softly, "Thank you, sir," placing his hand over his heart. One elderly gentleman simply raised 2 fingers in salute and walked on. Arthur returned each gesture with a quiet nod, the same composed calm he carried in uniform. He walked toward the store, but paused when he noticed a teenager standing just off to the side. Hoodie up, phone in hand, eyes wide with hesitant awe. The boy couldn't have been older than 16. He took a breath, then asked, "Sir, did you see the video? I mean, of course you did. You lived it. But—" He fumbled for the right words. "You're a hero. You didn't back down." Arthur smiled, not grandly, but with a warmth that came from deep within. "I just did what the Army teaches us," he said. "You don't retreat, not even when it's one of your own." The boy lowered his phone, nodding. In that simple moment, nothing more needed to be said. That evening, the city council convened behind closed doors. By nightfall, an official statement was released. Lieutenant Troy Hanley and Officer Jason Mayers had been terminated from the force. Their law enforcement licenses were permanently revoked. There would be no desk reassignment, no quiet transfer. The record would stand. But the story didn't end with punishment. It lived on in classrooms and lectures. Law schools across the country began teaching the Miller case, not for the legal complexity, but for the ethical clarity it provided, for how a man in the right, though wronged, could reshape the conversation without ever raising his voice. In time, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point unveiled a new portrait in their Hall of Honor. It stood not beside generals of war, but in a new section dedicated to modern leadership. It bore no weapon, no battlefield behind it, just the calm face of a man standing tall in civilian clothes, shoulders squared, gaze forward. Below the frame, a single inscription: "Justice is not given. It is claimed with clarity, courage, and restraint." Arthur J. Miller never called himself a hero, but the country did, and more importantly, so did the next generation.